So we decided this week that we were going to do our video while baking some banana muffins because we both like to bake. And so here we go. So Annie, I know there was a podcast that we both listened to, and it was John and Lisa Bevere, right?
I think so,
The two of them together, and we'll link for you guys the podcast in case you want to listen to it. But it was one that we both really enjoyed, the topic of hope. So I just kind of wanted to talk through some of the things we've learned as from the podcast as well as our life, and kind of tie it all in together and things we've learned. But first, let's get started on these muffins. So what's the first step here?
Whisk together oil and honey.
Oil and honey, alright. So we did pre-measure everything just to make the video easier. I will put the link for the recipe in the comment section below for you guys. But, so, talking about this topic of hope. So firstly, tell me about what was going on in your life when you listened to the podcast.
Coming from that mindset of isolation. Very kind of similar to what's going on right now, I guess. But in a different level, I was kind of the only person that I knew my age that had a good career. You had the eggs.
Okay, cool. So I think when I first watched the podcast, or listened to the podcast rather, I was at a point where I was having a hard time feeling hopeful about the future because I didn't know where I was going in life, what was next for me, so it was hard for me to feel hopeful. And listening to the podcast really made me start to dive into the topic of hope and how important it was. So what were some of the things that you learned in that season? Because I know it was around the same time that we watched the podcast and both kind of started doing a little digging of our own and a Bible study of our own on that topic of hope. So I just wanted to hear what were some of the things that you learned during that
time. So I had always kind of had this mindset of don't get your hopes up, because you get your hopes up, you're gonna get let down.
Yeah.
And then really the Bible says faith is the substance of things hoped for. And so I was well, if faith is the substance of things hoped for, maybe I'm supposed to. And it was kind of this way of well, am I really having faith if I'm not really hopeful in what I'm praying for to happen? Kind of was what the biggest thing for me was okay, well, I'm praying these prayers, but I'm not really hopeful they're going to come.
About the spirit of hope deferred. And it was the first time I ever thought of hope deferred, meaning, a hope that hasn't come true, a hope that we have in our hearts that hasn't been fulfilled. And the Bible says that hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I think that's kind of what I was feeling is these things that I had hoped for haven't come. Realized hope deferred wasn't something I had done wrong. It wasn't God holding out his promises for me. It was a spirit from the enemy trying to attack me. It was such a huge, it's like the light bulb went on. And I was able to then, it was almost like I was given permission to hope again. Yeah. And that was such a powerful thing, because life without hope is dull.
It's boring, it's sad, it's depressing.
Yeah.
And a good point that they brought up in that podcast, they talked about Joseph a lot. And Joseph, because he, went through that season in Egypt where he was a prisoner, and he didn't understand why God had given him these dreams as a young child of, ruling pretty much. And that's something I know for me. I'm well, why do I have all these dreams if they're not coming true? Why
do I have all these awesome dreams when I live in a small town?
And it just kind of was this, but he never lost the vision for his dream. I think that's the difference. That's why it wasn't hope deferred, is because he never lost the vision.
If you were a teenager or even a young adult in the place where you're having a hard time having hope, how do you go from not having hope to having hope?
For me, it was looking on the things that God already has done, knowing he's done that. Nothing's going to keep him from doing what I'm asking now. Yeah. Kind of was my thing was looking at
his track record is coming through all the time. Yeah. So that's what I can bank on. Sometimes it's as simple as realizing, in this season, I'm not where I want to be, because I always have dreams and goals and aspirations that are ahead of where I am. And that's okay. It's okay to be in the in-between and to find contentment with where I am, just like Paul said in the Bible, to be content. And so I think that was a huge key for me, is to be content with where I am and still looking forward to the future.
Hopeful for what?
Yeah, it's like a balance. Because if I'm dissatisfied with where I am and too excited for the future, striving so hard for the future, then I just end up exhausted. And so there's a balance between being content where I am and still hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I think we get so stuck on like, oh, well, this is where it could be, or I know I get stuck on like, this is the big picture, this is what I want to see, that I miss the things and the miracles happening now.
Yeah,
and I miss the life changes that are happening now. It's kind of like the same thing as like the weekend mentality of like, oh, I want it to be the weekend, so I'm gonna waste my 5 days just being, getting to the weekend.
It's hump day, man, like baby Friday. Stupid stuff.
Someday I'll have money and can give. Like, someday instead of right now I have,
Yeah,
what
so
I have.
the Lord says that, I will, this is the day the Lord has made, I will rejoice and be glad in it, even if it's Tuesday, which it is currently Tuesday for us. So, it's a good point. I just loved, specifically in the podcast, how they talked about how powerful hope is. The Bible says that 3 things will remain: faith, hope, and love. And it's amazing that hope made it in those 3, but it's something we don't talk about a whole lot. It's an extremely powerful thing in our lives to have hope. And I've noticed when I have hope for the future, then my life has more joy. It's almost easier to have joy. Hope is a very powerful thing.
Yeah, and I think our culture's bought into a lie of hope is this like fairy tale, fairy,
fluffy
butterfly thing. Which they're all fairies, butterflies are awesome, but they're just this like, oh, I hope one day. But it's really like this like taking a stand and being like, no, I hope.
It's not what's the word I'm looking for? It's not something that you passively do. It's something you have to aggressively do. Hope is aggressive. It's not just a passive, I'm going to sit here and hope everything goes okay. Maybe that's why we have such a negative connotation, because the English dictionary has hope as like, oh, I hope this happens, instead of I'm standing on God's word that this is going to happen.
Were you gonna add chocolate chips to that?
Yeah, I forgot the chocolate chips. That's the best.
Father God, thank you so much for this time that we got to get together and talk about hope. And I pray right now that you begin showing each of us a new way to think of hope, a new perspective of your hope and what that means in our lives. And I pray for everyone watching this video that they go from a point that they just begin to start believing and focusing on your hope, God. Pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for watching, guys.